I can testify to that, and would encourage people to take a look. I think I'm just thinking back to our audience here for the podcast. What advice would you give learning leaders as they contemplate and approach research projects, either with you or sort of in general? I'm sort of interested in helping people understand the way. I mean, a lot of money gets spent on research, and it's not all created equal. You know that.
Yeah.
And how can we help learning leaders prepare to get great value? Are there any sort of common mistakes that you see that they should avoid?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple. The first one, I think, is that a lot of leaders are looking for silver bullets, the answer, and there is no silver bullet ever. No matter what research you're reading, it has to be adapted for your organization and the environment that you're working in. Mm-hmm. And so my first piece of advice would be don't do that. Don't look for silver bullets. And then the second thing is look at the depth of the research. There is a lot of stuff out there. A lot of vendors are putting out some stuff, and some of it's very, very good. But take a really critical eye of what the research says and what the motivations behind the research are before you take it as gospel.
That is so true. I read this piece recently where it talked about the need to teach school children filtering and how to sort the wheat from the chaff, and how to really take a piece of content and dig into it and find out the source and understand the biases and so on and so forth. I think that's a skill that is desperately in need, not just for kids, but for all of us. There's some real junk out there, right?
I 100% agree with that.
No such thing as a free lunch or free research. You just got to do your hard work.
Right.
Good. Great. Well, good advice. We at Learning Futures Group, we're always interested in ways. One of the things that we feel that the workplace learning discipline needs to get better at is being more data driven. And not just to prove our own value and ROI to the organization. I know that you are launching a research project on measuring learning impact, which I think will be very, very interesting to people, hopefully for the right reasons. Can you describe your premise for that and the approach? And then how could people get involved? Because I think this one's going to be red hot.
Yeah. So the premise actually came about, it's one of my soapboxes. I stood up sometime in the fall on the soapbox and started shouting, we're doing this wrong, which we all know. We all know that measuring learning is a disaster and we've not done it right probably since the learning department was founded back in the Taylor days.
Because it was time and motion and productivity and faster, better, cheaper, right?
Yeah, we're measuring people like robots, and we're focusing way too much on efficiency, which I just think is wrong. And so, like the thing, as we looked at these things, two things came to mind. The first one is that we measure courses, and most of the learning that we do is not courses. And so we're basing how successful we are as a learning department on courses.
On these transactions, right? These one-off transactions.
Yeah, and every single model that I looked at, Chris, like every single learning measurement model I could find measures courses. It uses courses as the unit of the evaluation, which is crazy.
Right.
And then the other thing that we do is we measure conformity. So we're still stuck in the days where we need people to perform things in a certain way so that we can hit our efficiency numbers. That's how we're looking at it as the learning department. But as an organization, we know that that's not how it works. We need people to think outside the box. We need them to do different things, but we're still sticking them with assessments with multiple choice answers and those types of things. And so this study actually sort of digs into that and takes a look at all of that. We're almost through our lit review and looking at everything that's out there as far as how are people doing it and what has worked and what does the research that exists say and all of that stuff. In hopes that we can come up with a model or a framework that works a little bit different for the modern day.
That sounds good. Like the project's already underway. Can people kind of feather in? Can people join in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are starting our membership right now. We're not charging for it for a few months, but right now it's just open. So if you're interested, go to the website and look up the Learning Impact Premise. There's a little sign up, and then we'll make sure you're updated on everything that happens with the project. If you want to be interviewed because you have some brilliant idea, let us know via email. And we're also doing things like roundtables. Like we just barely sent out an email for our first roundtable. If you want to get together with a bunch of leaders and talk about these problems and some of the solutions that they've come up with, let us know.
Fantastic. That's a great way to get a taste of the work that these good people at RedThread Research do, and I'd encourage everyone to get involved. This is a big challenge for us. We've been really focused on this for way too long.
Yeah,
we need to move on, I think. Let's switch topics a little bit, and let's talk about learning technology. You have a robotic AI assistant. I know this because she doesn't like me very much.
Oh, come on.
And I don't know why she's gender specific either, but you're also a self-confessed data nerd and tech geek. And more importantly, you're speaking to tech vendors every day in a landscape that you referred to in a recent paper as the wild, wild west. In that report, which is on your website, you call out 5 trends. Can you, in terms of what's going on in learning technology, do you think you could share a couple of those trends? And could you make one of them what's going on with respect to data?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, read the report. It's really interesting. There's a tool on the site where you can actually go in and plug in the vendor, and it will pop up all the things that the vendor does, because we just need to think about the space differently. A couple of trends that we're seeing in the learning tech space. The first one is that there are just a lot of freaking vendors out there.
Yes.
We've talked to like 183 of them, or gotten information on 183 of them, and I have 6 briefings this week to understand that space a little bit better. The other thing that we're seeing is that there are lots and lots of point solutions. It's becoming a pretty common story where I'll talk to the CEO of one of these small companies, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I was working at an organization managing my team, and I couldn't find anything to help me do X, so I quit and found some venture funding, and now a company." So we're seeing that more and more. And so I would say over half of the vendors in the market are just point solutions. They just do one thing.
Yeah.
And they're good at it. They're really solid solutions that are sometimes ahead of what even learning leaders think they need right now. But they're ahead. And I think for the first time since the foundation of the learning tech space, point solutions have a chance of making it without being gobbled up.
Yeah, I had Sam Herring from Intrepid in Seattle on the podcast. Actually, we recorded it earlier this week, and he was saying basically he called it sort of 2 guys and an Amazon Web Services account, and there's no barriers to getting into the technology space. And if you have a passion for something, the good news is if you're focused on something and you have a passion for it, you're probably going to do a better job than maybe a sort of broader, sort of more monolithic platformy type company, and really sort of bottom out features and functions and really innovate in the space, I think.
For sure.
On the flip side, I think this proliferation is kind of scary for a lot of learning leaders. Technology decisions historically have been pretty mammoth decisions with multi-year deployments and high stakes alignment across your organization, and people get fired for making the wrong technology decision and can slow their organization down a lot. So I worry about whether people can trust the sort of new breed of tech vendor. They're sort of so fleeting, and they're so agile, might be on the good side, but maybe gone tomorrow. How do you feel about that?
I think you can trust most of them, and I think that's true for a couple of reasons. 3 reasons actually. The first one is this is where some of the innovation is coming from. We have seen some really interesting innovations when it comes to learning technology that are just these little small companies, like you mentioned, 2 people on an Amazon cloud account. So a lot of innovation is coming through here, and Josh Bersin and I regularly have this argument whether they're just going to get sucked into the big ones or whether they're going to stand on their own. And I think there will be a polarization, but I think they'll still be able to stand on their own. And that's for a couple reasons. The first one is they're pretty low risk. They understand where they sit in the learning tech ecosystem, and they have made it easy to plug in and plug out. So instead of a massive 3-year implementation, you're talking about 3 weeks and a strong API to get the information that it needs in order to work in your organization. So it's much lower risk, and it really allows people to experiment in ways that they haven't been able to experiment before.
Yes, this is the sort of design thinking approach that it allows you to sort of iterate very quickly yourself, and just as they're experimenting and figuring things out, you can do the same with your population.
Yeah, and the really forward-thinking leaders that we're talking to are doing exactly that. There's one learning leader that I talked to that said, I purposely look for vendors that have been in the space for about 5 years, so I know they're not going to go under. But they're still on the cutting edge of innovation, and they haven't been acquired yet. So he's looking for those types of organizations because he knows that he can plug them in, experiment with them, and if they don't work, take them out and put something else in.
Right, so it's a kind of an approach. It's just kind of, you need to approach it in a different way than you might have approached installing your LMS 5-10 years ago, right?
For sure, yeah.
Great, interesting. Well, it's a super interesting space, and as you say, I was in Australia recently, and there was 5 local companies who were doing really interesting things. One was focused on onboarding, and they just really bottomed out that experience, which was great. Could we shift pace? I'm looking at the clock, and talk a little bit about not shift pace, but shift topic. Talk a little bit about your observations of the L&D space in general. And I should probably frame this up for people by saying that you were a pretty important part of the Bersin by Deloitte crew. And I think you worked on the maturity model. I know you worked on the maturity model for a couple of iterations. For me, the game-changing piece, if I've got it right, was that 2017 report. Is that the one where you introduced the sort of new model, and it sort of moved beyond the kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 to sort of very Zen kind of naming convention? It really, I think, started a whole new conversation in the space. What was your role in that piece of work?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a team to do something like that, but I ran that project and did the majority of the thought work associated with it. It was great. It was my swan song at Bersin.
Well, I think it was a game-changing piece, and I think people are still scratching their heads a little bit on those kind of 4 levels. But was there something there that sort of, do you think that was an inflection point for the industry, for the discipline?
I think it was. Before that came out, I had started talking about another one of my soapboxes, but I had started talking about invisible L&D, how the L&D department needs to rethink focusing on the courses and start focusing on the environment. And that was sort of a natural outflow. I think what resonated a lot with this particular one is we now had data to back up that idea. The initial reaction, I still remember presenting it in a room. It was sort of shock and awe. Like, does it really say that? Because it's so different than anything else that had ever been out there before. And there was a lot of fear initially, like, how do we measure this? And how do we prove the ROI on, so I think it's created a discussion. Josh obviously picked up the term learning in the flow of work, and he's a great trumpet to have behind your ideas, and sort of peppered the entire industry with it. I do think people have started thinking about it differently.
That sort of level 4, which I think you described, kind of named as kind of anticipatory flow, I think was what I remember. It's like being in a yoga class when I heard it for the first time. What can you just give us a little sense of, just for people who haven't read that report, and I would encourage people to go find it online, which you can. Talk a little bit about this sort of 4th level and what you saw organizations doing that was so significantly different from what had been done before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a couple of things. First of all, like just the anticipatory part, you're no longer waiting for someone to tell you what's going on. You're actually anticipating the needs of the individual in their job and making sure that happens. It also focuses on sort of like a long-term view of the individual, not a point solution, a course or something that solves an immediate problem, but a long-term view of the development of people in your organization. I think one of the things that probably resonated with me most was this idea of feedback loops, and instead of just using data to take a look at how we can make better decisions, feeding them directly back into the system, including down to the individual level, so that they have the information they need to improve. It was, it's pretty radical.
That was, I think, a lot of great conversations came out of that. It's now, of course, several years later on.
Yeah.
How has your thinking evolved? What are you seeing going on today? Bring us up to speed from the Dani perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it went far enough. I think I've seen some adaptions of the idea, like a push for microlearning, which just ticks me off every time somebody says microlearning in the flow of work, because that's not exactly the intention. The intention is you're never actually taking somebody physically or mentally out of the work. You're just helping them with the work as they go along.